My neighbor delivered groceries to his basement daily but lived alone. One night, I heard crying from his vents. When I confronted him, he coldly said, "Must be the pipes." I reported it, but he showed the police an empty basement. Suspicious, I followed him one night and saw him unlock a hidden door. Days later, he moved out suddenly. The landlord found a soundproof room with chains bolted to the walls. I never found out who he was keeping there. I live in a small, quiet neighborhood in Pittsburgh, the kind where people nod at each other but don't really know one another. It's safe, nothing crazy happens, and most of the houses have been here for decades. That's why my next-door neighbor always stood out. The guy, let's call him Greg, was in his late 50s, tall, thin, and always wore the same navy blue hoodie, no matter the weather. He never had visitors, no family, no friends. I never saw him leave for work, but he wasn't retired. He kept to himself, never caused trouble, never joined the block's summer barbecues. Just a quiet old dude who stayed in his house. At first, I didn't think much about him. But over time, little things started to feel off. For one, he got groceries delivered to his house every single day. I'd be outside mowing my lawn or taking out the trash, and without fail, a delivery driver would pull up and drop off several bags. At first, I thought maybe he had some kind of health condition and couldn't leave his house. Maybe he was just an old guy with a weird routine. But then I noticed something even stranger. He always carried the groceries downstairs. Now, I don't know about you, but when I bring home groceries, they go to the kitchen, maybe the pantry, maybe the fridge. But Greg? Every time, I'd see him through the window, carrying the bags straight to his basement. Never to the kitchen. Never putting stuff away in cabinets. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe his kitchen was being renovated. Maybe he had an extra fridge down there. Maybe he was just eccentric. But then, one night, I heard something that made my blood run cold. I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth, when I heard it, crying. Not loud, but enough to be heard through the vents. It was faint, muffled, like it was coming from underground. A child? A woman? I couldn't tell. I turned off the faucet and listened. The sound was there, clear as day. Someone was crying inside Greg's house. My stomach twisted. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he had a relative staying with him. Maybe he wasn't alone, and I just never saw anyone else coming or going. The next morning, I decided to ask him about it. I walked over, rang the doorbell, and waited. Nothing. I knocked harder. Eventually, I heard footsteps. The door cracked open just enough for me to see one eye. "Yeah? Hey, sorry to bother you," I said. "I live next door. Just wanted to check in. Last night, I thought I heard someone crying." Before I could finish, he cut me off. "Must be the pipes," he said, his face completely blank, voice flat. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the door slammed shut. I stood there for a second, my heart pounding. Pipes? I've lived here for years, and I've never heard pipes that sound like a crying person. At that point, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. So I did what any normal person would do. I called the police. I told them what I heard, that I was worried someone might need help. They took my statement, sent 2 officers over to check it out. I stood outside, watching as they knocked on Greg's door. He answered after a long pause, same as before, just enough for them to see him but not enough to invite them in. They talked for a while, and eventually, he let them in. My pulse was racing. 15 minutes later, they came out, exchanged a few words with Greg, and left. I ran over before they could drive off. "What happened?" I asked. "Is everything okay?" One of the officers looked at me and sighed. "We checked the basement," he said. "It's empty. Nothing suspicious." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Empty? How? Are you sure?" "I swear I heard something." He cut me off with a polite but firm nod. "There's nothing there, sir. If you hear anything else, give us a call." And then they were gone. I couldn't believe it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at my ceiling, running through every scenario. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. So I started watching him. Greg rarely left his house, but when he did, it was always late at night, long after most people were asleep. He'd slip out the front door, get in his car, and drive off. I needed to know where he was going. One night, I waited. Around 2 a.m., I saw his headlights flicker on. He pulled out of his driveway and drove off. I grabbed my keys and followed. He drove across town to a hardware store that was closed for the night. But he didn't go inside. He parked behind the building, disappeared into the shadows, and came out carrying a large duffel bag. He got back into his car and drove home. I parked down the street and waited. He got out, looked around like he was making sure no one was watching, and carried the duffel bag inside, straight to the basement. Something inside me snapped. I had to know what was down there. The next day, I took the morning off work and kept an eye on his house. Hours passed. No movement, no sign of him. At noon, a moving truck pulled into his driveway. Greg was leaving. He never told the landlord, never gave notice, just packed up and left. A week later, the landlord came by to check on the house. I waited until he was done and casually walked over, pretending to make small talk. "Find anything weird?" I asked. He looked at me, his face pale. "There's a room in the basement," he said slowly. "Behind a false wall. It's completely soundproofed. Chains bolted to the floor." The air left my lungs. Was there anyone? The landlord shook his head. It was empty. I stared at the house, the blank windows, the locked door. I never found out who Greg had kept down there. I never saw him again. And I never slept right after that. For weeks after Greg disappeared, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something, that I'd been this close to uncovering something awful, but it slipped through my fingers. The empty room with the chains, it haunted me. I found myself watching the house more than I should. It sat empty, waiting for the next unlucky person to move in. The landlord put it up for rent, but no one seemed interested. Maybe people sensed something was off. Maybe the house itself carried the weight of whatever had happened inside. Then, late one night, something happened that made my stomach drop. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling like I had so many nights before, when I heard it. A knock. Not on my door. On Greg's old house. I sat up, my heart pounding. Who would be knocking on an empty house in the middle of the night? I moved to my window and peeked through the blinds. A man was standing there. It wasn't Greg. He was taller, heavier, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His back was to me, but I could see him shifting from foot to foot, looking around like he was nervous. Then he knocked again, louder. And then he tried the doorknob. My breath caught. It was locked, obviously. The landlord had secured the place weeks ago. But this guy. He wasn't just some lost neighbor or a drunk mistaking the house for his own. He was trying to get in. And then, as if he could hear my thoughts, he turned and looked right at my window. My stomach dropped. I froze, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The man stared for a second, then turned and walked off the porch, disappearing down the street. I waited, gripping my phone, debating whether to call the police. What would I even say? Hey, a random guy knocked on an empty house? But something told me it wasn't random. Something told me he knew exactly whose house that was, and he knew someone had been inside the basement. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. I checked my security cameras, but the footage was grainy, and the guy never looked directly into the light, no clear shot of his face. Then, as I was about to head to work, I noticed something that sent chills through my body. The side gate to Greg's old backyard was open. It had been locked before. I was sure of it. I walked over, pushing it open with one finger. The hinges creaked. The backyard was empty, overgrown with weeds. But when I glanced down at the dirt near the basement window, my blood ran cold. Footprints. Someone had been there. Someone had tried to get in. That night, I stayed up. I kept all my lights off and sat by the window, watching, waiting. Hours. You can click on share and more to see if there is a part 2. Nothing passed. The street was silent, still. Then, just past 3 a.m., a car rolled slowly down the street, not fast, not normal, creeping. It stopped in front of Greg's old house. The headlights flicked off, and then the back door opened. The same man stepped out. I held my breath. He stood there for a minute, looking around, then walked straight to the side gate and disappeared into the backyard. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man trying to break into the house next door, I whispered, afraid he'd somehow hear me through the walls. The dispatcher asked for details, and I gave her everything, the car, the man, the way he had tried the front door the night before. Officers are on the way, she said. I stayed by the window, my whole body tense, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then he came back into view, but this time, he wasn't alone. He was dragging something, a duffel bag, a big one. He threw it into the trunk, slammed it shut, and got into the car. Then he looked at my house, right at my window. In that moment, I knew he knew I was watching. The car peeled off, disappearing into the night. The police showed up 10 minutes later. They searched the property but, like before, found nothing. The basement was still empty, but something was different this time. The false wall, it was open. Someone had been inside and had taken something with them. The officers asked if I had seen anything else. I told them about the car, the man, and the duffel bag. They took notes and promised to check security footage from nearby houses, but I could tell they didn't think they'd find anything. Neither did I. 2 days later, the smell started, faint at first, coming from the storm drain in the street, like something was rotting. The smell got worse. At first, I thought maybe it was a dead animal. It happened sometimes, a raccoon, a stray cat, maybe even a rat that crawled into the storm drain and never made it back out. But within a few days, it was unbearable, thick, rotten, lingering in the air no matter where I stood. Even the mailman complained about it. It was strongest near the curb right in front of Greg's old house. I tried to ignore it, I really did, but something about it gnawed at me. Then one morning, I woke up to something even worse. My backyard gate was open. I hadn't touched it, I never left it open. I stepped outside, my skin prickling with unease. There in the dirt by my back fence were footprints, not just one or two, a whole set of them circling around. Someone had been back there, watching, waiting. I stood frozen, my stomach turning. I locked my doors and windows, I checked my cameras, but I had been asleep. Whoever had been back here had been careful. I checked my security footage, nothing. It was like they knew exactly where the cameras were. The smell, the footprints, it all felt connected. That night I barely slept. Every creak, every shift of the house, made my breath hitch. I'd always felt safe in my home, now I wasn't sure anymore. A week later, a crew showed up on my street, city workers here for the smell. A few neighbors had complained and someone had finally decided to do something about it. I watched from my front steps as they opened the storm drain. One guy leaned over, shining a flashlight inside, and then he gagged, stumbled back coughing. Jesus Christ, he muttered, covering his mouth. The others peered in, one cursed under his breath. I stood up, my heart in my throat. What is it? I asked. They ignored me, speaking in low urgent voices. One pulled out a phone and dialed someone, another ran back to the truck and grabbed a long metal pole. A few minutes later, a cop car rolled up, then another. Something was wrong, something very wrong. I stepped closer but an officer put up his hand to keep me back. Sir, we need you to stay on your property. I swallowed hard and nodded. More people showed up, detectives, crime scene techs. I stood there as they worked with my heart pounding in my chest. Then they pulled something out, something wrapped in black plastic, the size of a person. My stomach turned, I backed away with shaking hands. I didn't need to see what was inside, I already knew. Greg was gone, the man with the duffel bag was gone, but whatever had happened in that basement, it wasn't over. Because that night, after the cops left and after the news vans packed up and drove away, I heard it again through the vent, a whisper, a voice so faint I could barely make it out, but I did, and what it said made my blood turn to ice. You shouldn't have looked. I didn't sleep that night, I couldn't, every sound in the house felt magnified, every shadow a potential threat. I kept replaying that voice in my head, you shouldn't have looked. It made no sense. Greg was gone, the cops had found something in the storm drain, though they hadn't released any details yet. The crime scene tape still fluttered in the wind outside his old house, and yet someone, or something, was still here. By morning, I was exhausted, but fear had settled into something colder, determination. I needed answers. I drove straight to the police station and walked up to the desk. Detective Owens, I said, the lead investigator. You can click on share and more to see if there is a part 3. Whatever the hell was going on in my neighborhood, they made me wait. After an hour, he finally came out, looking just as tired as I felt. Again, he muttered, what now? I took a breath. I heard something last night in my vents, I said. His expression didn't change, like before. He asked, not exactly? I admitted this time, someone spoke. They said, you should have looked, Owens. He gave me a long, unreadable look, then sighed and rubbed his face. You need to go home, he said. I blinked. Excuse me? Go home? Get some rest and stop looking into this? My stomach turned. He knew something, I thought. Detective, I said carefully, if you're telling me to let this go, that means there's something to let go of. His jaw tightened. Then, after a long pause, he motioned for me to follow him. We went into a side room, small, dimly lit, with just a table and 2 chairs. He shut the door and sat down, exhaling. You were right about your neighbor, he said. We don't know exactly what he was doing, but that basement wasn't just some weird storage room. The walls had scratches, human fingernails embedded in the cracks. Whoever was down there was more than one. I swallowed hard. But here's the thing, Owens continued, we ran his name through every database we have, nothing. No birth records, no social security, no employment history. The guy didn't exist. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. Then who is he? I asked. Owens leaned forward. That's what I need to ask you, he said, because if I didn't know better, I'd say he was never living in that house at all. My pulse pounded in my ears. What do you mean? I asked. The house was rented, Owens said. Paid in cash, month to month, no lease agreement, no ID required. The landlord just took the money and didn't ask questions. But here's where it gets weird. I gripped the edge of the table. Owens pulled out a folder and slid a photograph toward me. It was Greg's house, but something was different. The windows, the doors, the shape of the house itself. This is from 1995, Owens said. We pulled it from city records. That house burned down 28 years ago. I stared at him. He nodded. Total loss. The owner at the time, an old guy named Walter Finch, died in the fire. The house was demolished, but 10 years ago, someone built an exact replica, same layout, same materials. And whoever that guy was, Greg or whatever his real name is, he moved in right after. My hands were shaking. So what are you saying? I whispered. Oh, inside, I'm saying that man wasn't your neighbor. He wasn't some random recluse. He was part of something much bigger. And if I were you, his eyes locked onto mine, I'd forget I ever met him. I walked out of the station in a daze. Forget? How could I forget? I got home, Greg's house looked emptier than ever. The blinds still hung motionless, the door still locked, the basement still a dark, empty space beneath the ground, except it wasn't empty. I knew that now. I didn't sleep that night either, but this time I left the lights off, sitting in the dark, listening, waiting. Then, at 2:46 a.m., I heard it, the creak of a door hinge, not from my house, from Greg's. I held my breath, and then footsteps, soft, slow, moving upstairs. Greg was gone, the police had searched every inch of that house. There was no way anyone could be in there, but I heard them, step by step by step. My phone was in my hand before I even realized it. My fingers hovered over 911. Then a sound that made my blood turn to ice, a single knock, not on my door, on my bedroom window. I turned my head so slowly it felt like I was moving through water. The blinds were shut, I couldn't see who was outside, but they could see me. The knocking came again, a deliberate, steady rhythm. And then, through the thin layer of glass, a voice I should not have been able to hear whispered, "You shouldn't have looked." I called the police. By the time they arrived, the house was empty again. The footsteps were gone, the knocking had stopped. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The only proof that something had happened, my bedroom window, once locked, was now open, just an inch, like someone had been inside. I put my house up for sale the next day. I didn't wait for a buyer, I packed my bags, grabbed what I could, and left town. I don't care where Greg went, I don't care what was in that basement. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering, because somewhere I know the house is still standing, and someone is still watching. And no matter how far I run, I can still hear it. You shouldn't have looked.